Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So the women's sports, the interest in women's sports are literally at all-time high. In the panels in the morning, every single panel touched upon women's sports. So my first question is that this is sort of a second wave of investments. One, what motivated the first wave of investments? And what are the lessons that are learned so that can be the guidance to the next wave of investments? Alexis, do you want to go next?
Sure. I also just love, for a long time, I spent 15 years of my life founding and then building and then turning around Reddit. And now even as a publicly traded company, which obviously I'm proud of, I love the fact that what I get asked about more often is my investments in women's sports. Because I think the long-term capitalist opportunity there is massive. And so to answer your question, March of 2019, I was rage tweeting about how undervalued women's soccer was. I think the team in Seattle had just sold for $3 million, and I was just sitting there just running the numbers in my head. It didn't make any sense. So I said, well, I'm going to have to buy a team in the NWSL. And Alex Morgan, to her credit, I always want to give her flowers for this, responded in the replies and said, I can help you with that. And so about a month later, I had her down to the house. She was playing in Orlando at the time, and I just took notes and asked a bunch of dumb questions. And at the end of it, I decided, okay, I got to do it. Started talking to existing owners about buying their teams. And by the end of that year, so by the end of 2019, had paid $1 million, which was the price for an expansion at that point, for what would become Angel City FC. And most of my friends in investing said I would lose all of my money. At the same time, they'd be like, hey, but would you invest in my esports team? And I remember asking them, like, I love esports. I grew up on video games. I'm an investor in one, Cloud9, full disclosure. But I looked at them and I was like, but hold on, like we know these women are the greatest in the world. In this case, women's soccer. The average American can't imagine what American soccer excellence looks like unless you're thinking about the women, because the men are not. And I knew that for the most popular sport in the world that still hadn't made much of a dent in America, like we could market excellence. And we do it every 4 years because everyone pays attention to the women during the Olympics, and especially the World Cup. And then they disappeared. And then when I found out they were streaming their matches on Lifetime, I was like, are you guys serious? Like, of course no one's watching because no one watches sports on Lifetime. And very quickly started to realize that so much of the reason it was the way it was because the very people at the top didn't think about these as an investment opportunity. They thought about these teams as charity. And so full, credit to be given where it is, like it took a generation of pioneers to kick down the doors. I'm obviously married to Serena Williams, who did try to talk me out of it at first because she had experienced firsthand how challenging it was to help sports modernize, and with women's in particular. Tennis is the one example where, if you look at the data, again, you'll notice I'll never appeal to feelings, only facts. More Americans watch the US Open women final than the men every single year. Doesn't even need to have American women in the final. Doesn't need to have a Williams sister in the final. More Americans watch the US Open final for the women than the men. Now sit on that for a second. You ask the best question you can ask is why? Well, Billie Jean King a few decades ago said you got to pay us equally. Folks weren't very happy about that at the time, but you now created an environment where if you're paying everyone the same prize money, you might as well market them the same, especially when they're playing at the same time, at the same tournaments. And very quickly you start to build this opportunity for a couple of girls from Compton to say, yeah, let me change my life playing a sport where I can make life-changing money. You get generational talent, you get people who you can't look away from. You have a sport now that welcomes in so many new people to it. And we're looking at tennis, a sport that's got gender parity in so many ways because of all those things. Why not these other sports? So I'm lucky to be on this wave and just happy to have a surfboard.
Amazing. Fran?
Yeah, I'm still waiting on the proper introduction because I'm the athlete on the panel, former athlete, and we do a little something like, and now, we're used to those kinds of introductions, and high-fiving all over the place, so I'm happy to be here, Fran Harris, but I'm also one of the pioneers that Alexis mentioned. I played at the University of Texas on the NCAA's first undefeated women's basketball championship. Hook 'em. It's in my contract, I have to say hook 'em at least once during this panel. But some of you were there when our team was averaging 10, 12,000 fans a night, and this is 1986. And so what's happened, to your question, is eyeballs. Eyeballs. There were 12,000, 16,000 people there every night. We played one time on ESPN. Am I right, Carol Stiff? We played one time, and then the only other game that was on television, national television, was the final game of the season, the national title game. Can you imagine? All that 34-0 goodness that I was playing at Texas, and nobody got to see it until we played USC and the great Cheryl Miller in the final game, but we don't have to talk about that. That's what's happened. The eyeballs have multiplied, right? The game has always been good. When everything was happening this season, I was like, the W has always been litty. Women's basketball has always been lit. But what's happened is that now the economics are on display. People are starting to see how good of an investment it is. So for me, it's been a lot about the eyeballs. There's so many different ways that we can get eyeballs on that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think just the exposure that we're seeing with women's basketball, women's sports in general, is the reason that there's been an explosion.
Just very quickly, when you said that when you played, the average viewership, people that watch, sorry,
In
is
person.
12,000, right?
In person, yes.
Yes. What's the number today?
For Texas or in general?
Yes, for Texas.
I think Texas is averaging probably 8 or 9, and that's over the last 2 seasons. Yeah, so it took, women's basketball took a dip, and then the resurgence over the last, I would say, 5 years is what we're starting to see around the country.
And the difference is that all the games now
Are on television. Everybody has their network. There's a Longhorn network. There's the SEC network. There was the Pac-12. I think it's a Pac-2 now. Not sure what's going on out in the West, but everybody had their network, and so people were getting acclimated and introduced to the sport through a cable network or a digital network, whereas when I played, you didn't see us until Easter Sunday.
Amazing. So Caroline, you're the governor of Gotham FC. Could you talk about that, when you invested into that, what were the thoughts and how is it going?
Great. So I wish ours started with a rage tweet. It did not, but it would be a much better story. So hopefully one day we'll tell that story. So I started Next 3, which is our family sports investment arm, a few years ago. And now people often on panels like this, they're like, tell us about your, what college sport did you play and what's your passion for women's sports? And ours actually started pretty differently. So I started Next 3 because our family's been co-owners of the New York Giants for the last 30 years. And when I brought this idea to my family, the idea really was we've been in legacy sports a long time, and we can but sports is obviously changing, as you heard. We could either kind of lean back and continue to ride the wave of the NFL, or we could do that and have a front row seat and actually drive a lot of the innovation and the change in sports. And so I started this company called Next 3, where we invest in sports, but there was no women's sports agenda. This was not it's not a women's sports fund. But what we said is, where are the new changes in sports happening? Where is sustainable growth happening? And really quickly, there were so many different signs pointing towards women's sports and pointing towards, in particular, the NWSL. And so what we looked at is, as you heard from both of them, the first issue that we saw that felt like it was kind of on the cusp of changing was visibility and eyeballs. So even if you were one of those diehard women's soccer fans in this country, which we do see every 4 years, they come out, you literally couldn't find it unless you had a lifetime subscription account. You were not stumbling. A casual sports fan was not stumbling on an NWSL game. So no one was watching the games. The second part was there were no investments. 99% of investments in sports at the time, this was a year and a half ago, were in the men's game. So we're not talking about telling every brand out there and every owner out there, like, shut down your men's sports teams. We're saying literally 1%, 2% change, all of a sudden it really changes the equation if people start investing in women's sports. And then the third piece, which feels really ironic in the age of Caitlin Clark, was women's sports weren't really a part of culture. When we won the NWSL championship last year, and in our family, and we were all like, oh my God, New York finally has a champion. And we opened the back page of, I won't name the sports pages, but the ones that one reads in New York, and you couldn't find a single article about it. I mean, we were flying home, and the Giants happened to be playing the Cowboys that day, and we're on page 12 of and what's Daniel Jones gonna do? And oh my God, Saquon Barkley, and we just couldn't find no one was talking about the fact that Gotham had just won the championship. And so now, obviously, women's sports are probably as Alexis said, the question we all of us get probably asked the most. But that was very different a year and a half ago.
So Alexis, you mentioned that in 2019, right? You look at this team and you invest in them. The average value is $1 to $3 million, you would say, the women's team. And today is Michelle Kang this morning, the team was valued at 95 million today. So from this point on, from a branding and partnership perspective, where do you see the roadmap is for women's sports, and specifically for this room, how do you see investors can capitalize on that?
So, and to give you some framing too, when I stepped back from Reddit 4 years ago, I started full-time early stage tech investing, and I use a very generous definition of tech. But my business is being the first check-in. I mean, companies like Coinbase, Instacart, Flexport, Scoreplay, I know they're over here. So I'm used to fast-growing, high-tech type businesses. It cost $1 million to buy the expansion for Angel City. Technically, it was like January of 2020. And the most recent round of financing, Willow and Bob Iger took over on the control front. They invested at a $250 million pre-money valuation. So, for 4 years, that's the kind of growth that we're used to seeing in tech. And that's not, I don't think that's really, it's a credit to the fact that, like I said, this wave, it has been here. It's been looking for folks ready to pick up surfboards. And credit to Michelle, she's done a bunch of amazing investing, not just here, but overseas. And so I think the opportunity is still there. When I look at the NWSL in particular, and actually to your point, Carolyn, I didn't know that story because in my little bubble, I was like, this was a huge deal. And the reality is we still have work to do to tell the stories of these athletes. And the WNBA obviously has had an amazing moment. Everyone's excited for women's college basketball kicking off. I'm going back to UVA this evening to go see the Who's, the ladies team, get started on the season. But you have to imagine, there is this bigger movement. Clearly you're seeing valuations, you're seeing revenues increase. Angel City did about 32 million in revenue last year. So you're seeing real brand partnerships, and brands are lining up. And I think the most important takeaway I'd say here is every league is different, very, very different. You can't talk about it. It's not a monolith. I'm starting a women's track league. You're looking for opportunities here because not all parts of women's sports are still in the same development cycle. But the big opportunity that's going to make folks really turn their heads is in the brand deals and the partnerships, because you think you've seen the full extent of brand deals in men's sports, but most of those brands, whether they're trying to sell you medicine or cars or CPG goods, they're all trying to market to the ladies of the household. And the male professional leagues are very clear to show how allied they are and how supported they are. But just wait until those brands realize how many eyeballs are paying attention to women's sports, and they will keep growing. And then think of all the brands that spend lots of money on marketing, beauty, fashion, that don't have any kind of place to spend their money in the big men's leagues. And so I think, again, every one of these leagues, every one of these is at different stages, but you're going to see big opportunities to drive revenue as the eyeballs keep growing and as the media awareness keeps growing. I mean, I started a reality TV show with one of the stars of Gotham, Midge Purse, simply because we wanted to show the side of these athletes during their off season, because we believed if people are going to watch reality television of bored housewives, no offense to the bored housewives of all those different geographies, they don't have a lot going on. But you put 11 NWSL stars in a house together for 3 weeks, and the content is very engaging. And we're 3 episodes in, and I think cumulatively we've gotten over 30 million views across those 3 episodes. You can see it right now on Twitter. There's a market, there's an appetite for this stuff. And if anything, my thesis has been find really talented people, often women, who have great ideas, invest, support, and trust their instincts. And Midge is a great example. Sidebar, that iconic cigar photo that she took when she was the champion and the MVP at the end of last season, that should have been 1,000 more places in the world. But we were still at the very start of this journey. But there's more to go.
Yeah, I agree. Content is, for me, the wild, wild west for women's sports. There's so little content about us anywhere. By show of hands, how many of you know who Teresa Edwards is? Okay, so I was in New York for Sportico's other event, Rise of Women's Sports, and I had dinner with Teresa Edwards. Teresa Edwards was the first basketball player to play in 5 Olympic Games. And the fact that only 6 people raised their hands is a tragedy. How do you not know who Teresa Edwards is? That's how good Teresa Edwards was. And so the opportunity, as I see it in women's sports, is in the stories that we get to tell, the game around the game, the things that the Women's Sports Network is doing and endeavoring to do, which is to tell more stories, whether that's documentaries or reality shows. Or heck, how about we stop having tea parties when we're supposed to be talking about sports, like sports talk? Brian Donlon, I don't know if you're in the room, but in 1998, Brian Donlon hired me to do a halftime show with Mary Murphy, who is now calling the Los Angeles Sparks games. And we had this segment called Jump Ball, and it was an opinionated, real, all the facts, all the things, sports talk show, because we don't see women doing that. It's always a tea party. It's nobody can disagree, nobody can have an opinion, and that's what's needed. So the full picture of what women's sports can be is not really realized until we are tapping into all of those media areas.
Yeah, just to build on this idea of content, that is one of the many things that we were excited about in coming into the NWSL and Gotham is kind of, if I go back to my Peloton days, one of the things we realized early on in building the Peloton brand is that people were driven, people's affinity with Peloton was driven by their affinity to individual instructors. So, people would run up to me when they knew I ran marketing at Peloton and say, like, I love my Peloton, I can't live without it. I can't wake up without Ally Love, or I can't, end my day without Cody Rigsby. And so we've taken a really similar approach at Gotham, which is to say, let's build our athletes into the stars that they are. And obviously the off-season has been a great example of that. But we have individual stars people are so passionate about the players on our team. We have 6 women on the U.S. Women's National Team who just won a gold medal, another who just won a bronze with Germany. And so they have incredible stories to tell. And as Alexis can probably tell you, female athletes are actually much better at social media than male athletes are. So if you think about all that together in a world where we're in an athlete-driven culture mixed with the fact that we have female athletes here that have these incredible stories to tell, that is where I think, we'll all look back a few years from now and think about, I can't believe for people that are not seeing this wave, they're gonna all look back and see, how did I not see this coming?
Amazing. So now we talked about the future. Let's talk about 2024. It's coming to an end. What is the biggest accomplishment that you would say for you, specifically in your companies, in 2024? Alexis, you want to start first?
Okay. All right, this is probably recency bias, but I have to give my team a ton of credit. Just after the Olympics ended, we said, these women shouldn't disappear. We should put on a record-breaking event here in New York, the greatest city on earth. And we called it Athlos, record-breaking cash prize, biggest in the history of the sport. We got Tiffany & Co. to produce one-of-a-kind crowns for each of the winners. And we had Megan Thee Stallion performing afterwards. DJ D-Nice spun in between the races. And, we sold out 5,000 at Icon, screaming their faces off, vibing. And 3 million people tuned in to the broadcast to watch this event. And it just felt so validating to see how happy these athletes were. And our bar, we have OKRs, but our most important one was that every one of these women would come away from this event saying, this was the best track meet of my life. And I wish every track meet was now up to this standard and up to this level. And it turns out we checked off all those boxes for these ladies. And we have stars here like Gabby Thomas and others that make us so proud as Americans every 4 years. Now, stop me if this sounds just like why I told you women's soccer was so compelling 4 years ago, but we have these amazing stars in track and field, these women, and it's a global sport, but America's got some really talented athletes that disappear. And when I found out the top prize they would make in a championship in a normal regular season was $30,000, my jaw hit the floor. And I was like, Gabby, you can't be serious, like $30,000 for a top prize. How are you a professional athlete? Well, that's the reality until we announced Athlos. And it shouldn't surprise you that in the weeks after announcing, we just doubled the prize. We said $60,000 if you win first. It's one race. It's the biggest ROI you'll ever make as a track athlete. Within weeks of announcing that, all of a sudden the prize money started going up. Now that might be correlation or causation, we'll never know. But all I know is for the women who participated, they came away saying this is the new standard. And our belief is we can keep replicating it. Investors will keep showing up. Brands will keep showing up. Fans will keep showing up. And like I said, I just feel grateful that we're at the right place at the right time.
Is there an over 40
You know, so
Lane, I can get in. I
So
mean,
Sonia
you know.
Richards-Ross was one of our hosts for the event, and she's obviously an Olympian and a star. And she's been asking for a legacy Athos
Yes, legacy
event.
I like.
So you can have
Legacy
like
I
a legends or a legacy thing. So
Yeah.
so TBD.
Yeah, for me, I would say I launched a brand, a woman-centric, girl and woman-centric electrolyte drink on Shark Tank in 2021. Was ready, like this is it, this is amazing, nobody's ever done this. And then the pandemic happened. And I like to tell people the pandemic tried to steal my life, Electra's life, but we survived, and fortunately we have a tremendous interest. I took a year off from that and just chilled, just like, I'm not gonna make anything happen, I'm just going to see what happens in the marketplace. And now we have tremendous interest, and we're relaunching that brand in 2025. So I'm very excited about that.
So when I think about the past year, with Gotham in particular, we obviously have had tremendous success on the field. We're about to host our first ever home playoff game on Sunday. If you're around, 3 o'clock on Sunday, be there, which would be great. Obviously, we had our Olympians. We celebrated last year's championship at the White House. We were the first women's soccer team to be celebrated, as every men's team does when they win a championship. So that was great. We've had, that was more of a, we just should have, everyone should have done it. We had great ticketing success. I think the one metric I would point to is our NPS score. And so for those that are not familiar, that's your Net Promoter Score. And that is basically the answer to your question, would you come back again, in simpler terms. And we have, our NPS score is in the high 80s after every game, which if you're used to tech,
Wow,
Alexis can
that's
say,
great.
Very good, right? Yeah, yeah. So basically, every time someone comes to a Gotham event, almost call it 95% of the time, they want to come back. And that, to me, I think, kind of hits the nail on the head of everything we're talking about, which is the product is there. We didn't invent that great product. The product was there. What we have done is amplify that, make it more accessible, allow others to be a part of it, because we know that that great product is there, and people just need an opportunity to be a part of it. I'd say the other piece, I was actually trick-or-treating with my kids last weekend, or whenever, I think that was last weekend, and my son was dressed as Malik Neighbors. He is a Giants player every year, just changes out the jersey, and we were trick-or-treating, and there were all these girls. We look over, my husband's like, wait, they're all dressed as Gotham players. And we're in this new town. We just moved. We're in this new town. They had no idea who we were. We didn't know who they were. Obviously, my husband chased them down the street, gave them my number, and got them playoff tickets. So they're all coming. But I think we felt like, okay, we are, not every girl there was a Gotham player, but there was a handful. And we are quite literally creating a platform for the next generation of role models.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. So last question, this is going to be a little bit challenging. In 3 words, what are your predictions for women's sports 2025? Alexis.
3 words. $1 billion franchise.
That's good. That's a good one.
Wait, 2025?
2025.
Oh, damn it. Sorry. That's in a year. Oh, that's not going to happen. 2030? Can I say for 2030? You really want next year? I've gone over my word count.
$1 billion franchise, hopefully next 5 years, you think?
Yes, for sure.
Amazing. Fran.
I would say shop while watching.
Ooh, good.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's great.
Okay,
Carolyn.
Alexis and I had similar ideas, but I was going to say iconic global sports, or iconic global franchise. Take out the women. We're not going to differentiate between the women and the men. It will just be iconic global brands.
That's amazing. I like that. One of the panels talked about the sports going global, right? It's not just in the U.S. and global. Well, thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.